6, no more face coverings required by law in England from today, despite new infections remaining stubbornly high. England is first in the UK to drop face coverings in shops and on public transport, but some retailers are urging customers to keep them on to protect others. With more than 85,000 new infections in England alone in the past 24 hours, we'll be asking if it's too soon. Also tonight, the unvaccinated NHS staff in England, more than 77,000, could lose their jobs if they don't have the first jab by next Thursday.
It is the professional duty of every healthcare worker, of social care worker, to get vaccinated, to not only protect themselves, but most of all to protect the people that they look after every day.
Troops training on the border, but Russia tells the United States that there is still room for dialogue over Ukraine. Portraits of the UK's last Holocaust survivors go on display at Buckingham Palace on the 77th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And one of the most influential figures in British comedy for the last 6 decades, Barry Cryer, has died at the age of 86.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England women are under pressure in the Ashes. They drop catches while the Aussies make hay on the first day of the test in Canberra.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. From today, England has dropped the legal requirement to wear face coverings in indoor settings. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, said Omicron is now in retreat, but many shops will still ask customers to wear masks as a courtesy to others, and it remains mandatory to wear a face covering on Transport for London services. Face coverings are still required in indoor settings everywhere else in the UK. Our correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
It's been 18 months since we started wearing these face coverings to help fend off COVID. So, is this the beginning of the end of mask wearing, in England at least? Here in St Albans, as restrictions eased, commuters seemed keen to carry on wearing them for now.
Of course, on the train, on the underground, I think, for the next few months, yeah, for sure, just to be safe in the supermarkets as well.
I will be wearing a mask on the train, yeah. So I've decided that, for the moment, with the numbers of cases, I would still rather protect myself and everyone else.
The government is advising masks should still be used in crowded and enclosed spaces. But the legal requirement has now gone. The Health Secretary says, thanks to the vaccination programme, it's time to move on.
We'll now be able to begin a new chapter. We see Omicron in retreat and we begin the road of trying to find all the best ways to learning to live with COVID.
Back in St Albans, this gift shop isn't wasting any time.
It's really lovely to be able to get a little bit of lipstick on again and not have to worry about having masks sticking to me. So today has felt quite liberating.
So you think the time's right for change?
Definitely for us. We're ready to rip the masks off, of course, while being really respectful of other people.
But down the road, it's business as usual for this hairdresser's.
At the moment, we feel that it is better to stick with wearing the masks, and we want people to come in and have their hair done feeling comfortable that we are still taking precautions, because it's a mixture of how people feel at the moment.
The mandatory wearing of masks has been contentious throughout this pandemic. Today's move is too early for some, and for others, it can't come soon enough. So how are people likely to behave now?
Regulations make a difference. If you put in place regulations, people will do things, and if you take them away, people are less likely to do things. But we still can be very clear about the messaging to say, look, it's important you do this. It's effective if you do it. It makes a difference.
To wear or not to wear. In England, it's now largely up to us to decide. Emma Simpson, BBC News, St Albans.
Some of the tightest restrictions during this pandemic have been on care homes, with very few visitors allowed inside. But from next Monday, COVID guidance in England will be further eased, with no limits on the number of visitors. Self-isolation periods will be cut and there will be changes on how to manage COVID outbreaks in a care home. Here's our social affairs editor, Alison Holt.
That's from Monday. We've got the unlimited visiting, which is great.
At Quarry House Care Home in Bristol, they're going through details of today's announcement to make sure they are ready for Monday. Unlimited visiting's a welcome change, but it means having extra tests and PPE in place.
Should make a lot of people happy. Yeah. Fantastic.
Dorothy Cook is one of the few family members who's been able to visit her sister regularly in recent weeks, so she can't wait for restrictions to be eased.
It will make things a lot easier, yeah, absolutely. She hasn't seen her nephews and nieces for a while, you know, and so that'll be really good, so we can all kind of like take it in turns.
The new guidance means from Monday in care homes in England, there will be no limit on the number of visitors that residents can have. If they go out on a day trip, they'll no longer have to test or self-isolate when they return. And if there's a COVID outbreak, so that means 2 or more staff or residents testing positive, then the length of time that the care home has to close its doors will be reduced from 28 days down to 14 days. At this care home, they believe vaccinations mean they can manage additional risk.
So far, the guidance has been quite cautious on those measures. Quite rightly, we're working with a vulnerable group of people. But with all of those management processes that we've put in place around the risk, it feels right to bring those restrictions down.
And visiting restrictions have taken their toll. Kate Meacock believes her mum deteriorated when family contact was like this, behind a screen. Now she's recognised as an essential caregiver, so can visit her mum whenever. She wants the role recognised in law.
I've lost 18 months of her life at a time when she needs her family around her most. So it's vital that we have, that we get this essential caregiver status put into law.
Visiting restrictions have already eased in Scotland. In Northern Ireland, up to 4 visitors are allowed, and in Wales, decisions are based on local risk assessments. Alison Holt, BBC News.
More than 77,000 staff working in the NHS in England haven't been vaccinated against COVID. That's around 5% of the workforce. If they don't have their first jab by next Thursday, they risk losing their job. The government has made it compulsory in England, unlike the rest of the UK. As time runs out, our health editor Hugh Pym has been talking to some of those who have chosen not to be vaccinated to find out why.
I'm Jocelyn, I've been a nurse for 30 years and I'm not going to have the second dose of the vaccine.
I'm Pauline, I'm a mental health nurse for nearly 20 years and I do not agree with the compulsory COVID-19 vaccination.
They risk losing their jobs because they don't want the jabs. There's been a heated debate, not least on social media. The hashtag #GetVaccinated trended on Twitter as doctors called for their colleagues to have the jab.
I would want the choice.
Jocelyn is a community nurse. She says it should be a question of personal freedom rather than an order by the government.
Isn't the best way to protect patients to get fully vaccinated?
Would you give up your freedom, your God-given freedom of choice for a job?
I think we should have the right to choose at this stage for our body about is it right for us individually.
There is nothing more insulting to a nurse than telling her that she's, causing harm to her patients.
1 minute the nurses, they were being clapped for and they had to work through it and they didn't care about all this and then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, if you don't get a jab, you're going to lose your job.
With England being the only nation with a mandate, Pauline is considering looking for a job in Wales. But Dr Chintal Patel, who's a GP, is not against the mandatory NHS staff vaccine. For her, your freedom to choose is lost when that decision could impact on patient safety.
I think if you are unvaccinated, then there is a risk that you are potentially exposing your patients to harm. Up to a third of people do not mount an immune response to the infection, and actually vaccination provides a much better immune response and also reduces the risk of transmission. So I do think those that are patient-facing should be vaccinated.
Most health leaders are supporting compulsory vaccines for frontline staff.
At the time of the consultation, a majority of NHS leaders believed that mandating the vaccine had benefits to their services, benefits to their staff and their teams, and had benefits in terms of protecting the public against transmissibility of the virus, but also in terms of building the public's confidence in the services that the NHS were providing.
On Saturday, those against the mandate made their voices heard. Maternity staff turned out in large numbers. For them, bodily autonomy is fundamental to their profession.
So I was going to ask about the protest.
Catherine, who's a midwife, was at the march.
Medical experts are strongly recommending the vaccine. Isn't that enough assurance for you?
I believe history has shown us that all of us should make our own decisions when it comes to our health.
She says if things don't change, she'll leave her Hampshire trust, but worries about the impact on care.
I do understand everybody wants patient safety, but during a staffing crisis, that safety will be severely compromised with less staff, and this decision will assuredly provide less staff.
There's now a week to go for unvaccinated NHS staff to have first doses. Ministers point to the fact that 95% have already had that first jab. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, coronavirus cases in the UK remain stable, with nearly 97,000 recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, just under 91,000 new cases were reported per day in the last week. The number of people in hospital with COVID is 16,510, and there were 338 deaths reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, though there will be some amongst this number who will not have died from COVID. On average, in the past week, 263 deaths were announced every day. On vaccinations, just over 37 million people have now had a booster jab, which means 64.5% of people aged 12 and over have now had 3 vaccine doses. The Prime Minister has rejected allegations that he personally authorised the airlift of cats and dogs from Afghanistan following the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. It comes after emails from officials published yesterday suggested Boris Johnson intervene to help the animal charity Nowzad. Labour says Mr Johnson has been caught out lying. Here's Damien Grammaticus.
They were desperate days. British citizens, Afghans who'd worked with the British Army, thousands at risk from the Taliban who never made it out. But Pen Farthing did, along with his animals. Dogs and cats cared for by his rescue charity were on one of the last planes out. Today, Boris Johnson again denied he'd had a hand in it.
No, and that is absolutely, this whole thing is total rhubarb. I was very proud of what our armed services did with op-pitting, and it was an amazing thing to move 15,000 people out of Kabul in the way that we did.
But an internal Foreign Office email written at the time, leaked and released yesterday, says the PM has just authorised the charity's staff and animals to be evacuated. And campaigners for the charity say Mr Johnson agreed its staff were under threat.
The Prime Minister understood those arguments, accepted them, and did put those people on the evacuation list, working with the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary to get the wheels of Whitehall moving.
The evacuation, Mr Johnson insists, was a success. It saved lives, but left many others behind. So once again, the issue is how truthful he's being now.
Somebody is lying about what happened during the events that led up to the evacuation of the animals from Afghanistan, and I think it's become increasingly clear that the Prime Minister's story is not credible. He has not told the truth.
In Wales today, he was perhaps hoping to escape questions about his probity. The focus, though, remains on this one issue.
And that applies whether it's Afghanistan or Downing Street parties. On Afghanistan, the Prime Minister's spokesman said today they think it's a case of an official thinking an order has come from the Prime Minister when it hadn't. On Downing Street parties, the investigation, which people hope will clear things up, well, that seems to be ongoing and being finalised, so it may not be published until next week.
Damien, thank you. Russia has said there is room for further dialogue on the Ukraine crisis as large numbers of its troops remain on the border. But in its first reaction to a US letter officially setting out Washington's position, the Kremlin says its main security demands have not been met. Key to what Russia will do next is Vladimir Putin. Is he trying to stop the eastward expansion of NATO, or has he already made up his mind to invade to preserve his grip on power? Steve Rosenberg reports from Moscow.
The world is still puzzling to piece together a picture of what Vladimir Putin is thinking, what he's planning, what are his intentions in Ukraine and in Europe. Russian muscle flexing is one piece of the geopolitical jigsaw. Military exercises and 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine's border are fueling fears of a Russian invasion. So are Moscow's demands.
We just ask our partners in NATO countries, get out from our borders, get out from post-Soviet countries, because it's threatening to Russian people, to Russian citizens, and time is running out.
Another piece of the puzzle. The Kremlin had insisted Ukraine be barred from joining NATO, but America's rejected that demand. So now what?
What happens next depends on whether America's offer to negotiate with Russia on some aspects of Europe's security will be enough to satisfy Vladimir Putin. If it's not, if, as some fear, President Putin's aim is to dismantle the European security order as it is now, we'll then expect long-term friction between Russia and the West.
Vladimir Putin cut a lonely figure today as he remembered the World War II siege of Leningrad. Across Europe, there are fears of a new war. But is Russia's current and very public sabre-rattling really a precursor to conflict? After all, this is a leader who normally employs the element of surprise.
This is one of the reasons why I do not believe that Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Because if he really intended to start a military operation in Ukraine, probably we would be the last to learn about it.
At the Gorky Park Ice Festival, everyone we spoke to thought it unlikely that the Cold War with Ukraine and the West was about to turn hot. Russians don't want war, Yelena says. We've experienced that. We know how terrifying war is. The Russian public has no appetite for war. They're hoping, neither do their leaders. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. No more face coverings required by law in England from today, despite new infections remaining stubbornly high. And coming up, £100 million from the government to help develop the planned nuclear plant Sizewell C in Suffolk.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, Exeter Chiefs will drop all references to Native Americans in their branding after the club came under criticism. They'll still be called the Chiefs, but will now use a logo based on a Celtic tribe.
"77 years ago today, the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz was liberated. More than 1 million people, most of them Jewish, were murdered at the camp in occupied Poland. Today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and to mark it, different artists have painted the portraits of some of the UK's last remaining Holocaust survivors. The project was commissioned by Prince Charles, and the portraits have gone on display at the Queen's Gallery in Buckingham Palace. Our royal correspondent Daniela Relf has more.
It's wonderful. I'm so looking forward to seeing you.
A first view of the portraits he commissioned. The Prince of Wales wanted to preserve their stories of suffering, of courage, of survival. Artist, portrait and subject. Clara Drummond painted Manfred Goldberg.
How have you been? Have you been well?
The process was challenging. COVID meant the sittings began virtually before they could finally meet.
Hello, Manfred!
She wanted not only to paint my likeness, but she tried to get sort of into my soul. She tried to paint me heart and soul. And looking at my portrait, people tell me that they can see it in the way she's painted my eyes.
Those eyes witnessed the atrocities of the Holocaust. Today at Auschwitz, a ceremony to remember the 77th anniversary of the camp's liberation. Manfred and his family had suffered in the brutal conditions of Nazi labour camps. One day his younger brother Hermann was taken by SS guards. Manfred never saw him again.
He did describe
it as hell on earth, and it was very hard for me to imagine what it must have been like. It was very harrowing, but I feel like that was really important, to go there and to realise how dark it had been, in order to realise what a bright light Manfred is.
So much is in the detail of each portrait. Arik Hirsch rests his right hand on his left arm, the arm that bears the number he was marked with at Auschwitz. Lily Ebert was also there. She is painted with her gold pendant, which she hid in the heel of a shoe. She still wears it today.
And I felt we owed it to these remarkable people just to remember them in this way. There is something very special about the portrait and about the artist's eye in bringing out the real underlying character.
They are portraits of a group of people that sadly gets smaller every year. The collection, a vivid testimony to the power of their stories and the bravery in their faces. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, at the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace.
And you can watch that documentary, Survivors, Portraits of the Holocaust, at 9 o'clock tonight on BBC Two, and you can also see it on the BBC iPlayer. A teenager has been arrested after 2 Jewish men were violently attacked in North London. The police said the incident is being treated as a hate crime. It happened last night in Haringey when the victims were locking up their shop. One man suffered bruising and a fractured bone in his hand, while the second also suffered bruising and has an eye injury. An 18-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of causing actual bodily harm. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford is here, and what more can you tell us?
Well, there's been a very, very strong reaction to this today. The Prime Minister in the last hour has said, "I'm appalled by this despicable footage. It's a terrible reminder on Holocaust Memorial Day that such prejudice is not consigned to history. We must stamp out anti-Semitism." That's the Prime Minister himself. What you've seen in that footage is 2 men locking up a bakery at about 10 to 10 last night. A young man walking past, he turns, starts punching them, pauses a bit, and then knocks one of the men to the ground. He then punches the other man several times. Both men ended up in hospital, one with a broken nose and a fractured wrist. The 18-year-old man was arrested nearby and at a street nearby, and he remains in custody. It is a really shocking bit of footage, but a reminder that this kind of casual attacks do happen still in Britain.
Daniel Sanford, thank you. £100 million is being provided by the government to help develop the planned nuclear plant Sizewell C in Suffolk. It's the latest stage in efforts to build a £20 billion reactor on the east coast of England. Sizewell C would be a near replica of one being built at Hinkley Point in Somerset and would power up to 6 million homes. Here's our business editor, Simon Jack.
Is this the answer to soaring gas bills? The government thinks in part it is. It wants to replicate this plant under construction in Somerset, here at Sizewell in Suffolk. And today it committed £100 million of taxpayers' money to help make that happen.
I think that in terms of getting decarbonised, local, secure, affordable energy, this is a fabulous investment.
This will take a decade to build. It'll be paid for by adding money to people's bills. We have a cost of energy and cost of living crisis right now.
I'm speaking with the Prime Minister, with Treasury, with the Chancellor about how we can mitigate that impact, and there'll be announcements in due course.
The company that wants to build here say it will bring proven economic benefits to the region and the UK.
You can see when you look at Hinkley the impact it's having on more than 2,500 suppliers across the UK. And it's just brilliant for training people, giving them skills, and those skills are actually useful for the whole construction industry and actually for the whole net zero electricity industry.
Sizewell C has not had final approval, but the government has committed to approving one new station this Parliament, and this investment shows their commitment to this site. Soaring gas prices are a short-term problem, but they also make a powerful argument, ministers argue, for long-term, large-scale nuclear. It's not an argument that washes with everyone.
The business secretary got a chilly reception today.
Sizewell C is the wrong project in the wrong place. It's far too slow, risky and expensive to address our climate emergency. And let's remember that this would be the biggest construction site in Europe for well over a decade, right next to very protected landscapes.
Millions of consumers will see energy bills rise by 50% when the price cap rises in April, exactly at the same time as a £12 billion tax rise takes effect. The Business Secretary said the government had discussed delaying that, but are pressing ahead.
That's how we're going to get the revenue to pay for the backlog and to pay for a sustainable social care system.
So no U-turn on the tax rise?
No U-turn.
Well, progress towards a new plant here inches forwards. A squeeze on incomes that will change the economic and political weather is accelerating towards us. Simon Jack, BBC News, Suffolk.
Tributes have been paid to the comedian and writer Barry Cryer, who has died at the age of 86. He was one of the most influential writers of his generation and wrote for comedy giants including Bob Hope, Morecambe and Wise and Kenny Everett. And he was known to millions for his role on the long-running Radio 4 show I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. David Silito looks back at his life.
I know a fat old policeman, he's always on our street.
Barry Cryer, a mainstay of radio's I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, but that was only the beginning.
What a lovely audience! Where are they?
Morecambe and Wise.
Yes. Never mind, they'll do. I saw them arriving on the coaches. Did you really? Yeah, with the blankets over their heads.
Kenny Everett, Les Dawson, Frankie Howard, the two Ronnies. He wrote for them all, and on Radio 4, a 50-year comedy partnership with Graham Garden.
He was very convivial, very funny, he loved telling jokes, and he loved to laugh, and he loved the sound of laughter. And I had many conversations with him when he would call about something else, or just to say hi and how are you, and would always end up by the way, have you heard? He'd regale me with his latest.
Born in Leeds, he'd started out in stand-up at the City Varieties Theatre after failing his university exams. More than 50 years later, he was finally given an honorary degree.
My academic CV, it was touched upon earlier, commenced with BA English failed. I also failed due to the outbreak of the Second World War, which was 16 years before, but upset me very deeply.
In the 60s, the comedy writer occasionally appeared on screen, here pouring the wine in the famous Four Yorkshiremen sketch.
Possible. Not bad at all. All right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In the 70s and 80s, he was a regular on TV, but this stalwart of old-school comedy was also a generous friend to the next generation.
He was genuinely one of those people who could, well, light up a cigarette and a room at exactly the same time. He was just a joy to be around, and he had a joke for every single occasion. Even if he told you the same one 6 times, it would remain funny throughout.
My short-term memory's shot to pieces, and I'll tell you something else. My short-term memory's shot to pieces.
It was, he said, a life dogged by good luck. Barry Cryer, a friendly, generous cornerstone of British comedy.
Barry Cryer, who has died at the age of 86. Time now for a look at the weather with Darren Bett. Hello.
Hello there. We got the sunshine today, Sophie, and it has been a beautiful sunset, but this all points to a colder night tonight. We've got clear skies across many parts of the country already, and those northwesterly winds will ease. The showers in northern Scotland will fade away, and before any cloud comes into western areas, we're going to find a few mist and fog patches developing across parts of England and Wales. Not quite so chilly further west, but for many central and eastern parts of the UK, there will be a pinch of frost by tomorrow morning. Some early sunshine perhaps, particularly eastern Scotland, England and Wales. Mist and fog patches slowly lifting in the morning. It's going to tend to cloud over from the west. We'll keep some hazy sunshine in southeastern parts of England. Further west, there could be a little bit of drizzle, more likely to get some rain coming into Scotland. All the while, we'll get a strengthening southwesterly wind, but that will blow in much milder air. So temperatures for many getting into double figures, 10 or 11. And those numbers won't drop actually very much overnight. We've still got very blustery winds actually into Friday night, and more rain coming into the northwest of Scotland. It's not been a dry January here, but again, that weather front as it moves southwards during Saturday will weaken, and so there's just a little bit of rain for a short time moving down into England and Wales. Clearer skies and a few showers following on behind. and it's getting colder as well. It's also going to be a windy day, I think, on Saturday. The winds could be gusting 60 miles an hour across parts of Scotland. We've still got double-figure temperatures across more southern parts of England and Wales, where we get that rain. And further north, though, those temperatures will be dropping off all the while. And it's going to be a cooler-looking day, I think, for Sunday. We start dry in most areas, and then we've got another weather system coming in from the Atlantic. That'll bring some wetter, windier weather across more northern parts of the UK. And with those temperatures a bit lower on Sunday, we could start to see some snow in Highland and Grampian. Sophie.
Darren, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.